Imagine for a moment that you're a peasant that lives in medieval Canterbury. Everyday life for you is a constant slog. You wake up before dawn, and you work until the sun sets. You pay heavy taxes to the Lord, disease is common, food is scarce. If you're lucky enough to have some free time and extra money, you can head down to the local tavern. But there you're surrounded by drunkenness and debauchery. But once a week, on Sunday, you get to go to the cathedral. You step in and see beautiful carved stone, high ceilings, ornate stained glass. You get the feeling that you're participating in something timeless, sacred, and not of this world. Here, for at least a few hours, you're not thinking about the struggles of the outside world. Now imagine the Mass begins, and the priest says, "Good morning, everybody. Instead of beautiful, reverent music from our hymnal that's been passed down for generations, I decided we'll sing Psalm 36 set to the tune of a drinking song they play down at the local tavern in order to bring outsiders into the church. Don't be afraid to sing along now. And a one, and a two, and a..." This would be a tragic misstep on behalf of the church, because the church is supposed to be a refuge from the outside world. It's supposed to lift your spirit to heaven. I would argue, in a similar way, when modern churches play music that sounds like music from the outside world, they're depriving Christians of the reverence and holiness that they can't get anywhere else. Criticizing contemporary worship music is often dismissed as snobbish. It's the gripes of fuddy-duddies who prefer old things just because they're old and hate change. And in some cases, maybe that is true. But in this video, I'm going to make the best case I can for why beauty and tradition matter in church, and why we as the church should pause and ask ourselves, if for roughly 2,000 years Christians worshipped in a certain way, why was it done that way? Why did it endure for so long? And what do we risk losing when we trade that sacred inheritance for something new and familiar to the world? But before going any further, I want to make two very important points. First, any sincere worship of God is a good thing. Most people today who go to a modern church and sing contemporary Christian music aren't thinking about the music style and where that style came from and the history of the church. They're just Christians praising God in the best way they know how. And any worship is better than none. If the only church you could attend were a modern quote-unquote rock concert church with a fog machine, I'd still argue that you should go. I'm not interested in engaging in some elitist, snobby critique of other sincere Christians. I just want the church body as a whole to strive to be the very best it can, because God deserves nothing less. And second, I am not against Christians listening to secular music in general. I'm only concerned with what music we're singing when we praise God in church. With that said, one of the biggest issues people talk about with modern worship music is how much it leans on emotional experience. A lot of times, it feels like the goal is to feel something rather than to worship someone. And if you want to look like you're really worshiping, there's this unspoken pressure to show it. Hands up, eyes closed, swaying back and forth. For some people, that's genuine and natural, and that's fine. But for a lot of others, and I think especially for men, it isn't. And that's not a bad thing. Worship was never meant to be about performing emotion. I'm not saying emotion doesn't belong in church. It does. But it shouldn't be the centerpiece. Worship is something that we do for God, not a feeling we chase for ourselves. For almost 2,000 years, the church understood that. Worship was reverent, structured, and focused on God's holiness, not our experience of it. But in many churches today, that's been flipped upside down. The focus has shifted from awe to atmosphere, and when that happens, we lose something important. Last year, a controversy arose in the Christian Twitter sphere when Pastor Armin Thomasian, and sorry if I'm butchering that, criticized the quote-unquote effeminate vibe he heard in a clip of congregational singing at an annual Christian event called Shepherd's Conference. Here's what that looked like. Lots of online pastors and theologians weighed in on this. Some were in agreement, but most of the big names pushed back and rebuked the effeminate characterization. The song Jesus Thank You is written in the style of a slow, gushy, soft rock ballad, which is a very common style template for modern worship songs. They're emotional, intimate, and almost theatrical. And I don't think it's some huge shock that to many, this comes off as effeminate and out of place in church. You can't bring the styles of secular music into congregational worship without also bringing the tone and emotions of it. The gushy, intimate style wasn't designed for congregational worship, and for many, it just feels out of place. The reliance on emotion in contemporary Christian music didn't come out of nowhere. Contemporary Christian music and the concept of the modern worship service came from the Jesus People movement of the 1960s and 70s. Back then, the cultural upheaval we now call the counterculture movement was in full swing. If you've seen Forrest Gump, this is what Jenny was all caught up in and why she was so troubled. Hippies, rampant drug use, debauchery, and psychedelic music were all prevalent. It was a rebellion against the Christian morality that had molded Western society's ideas of what was good and acceptable. The Jesus People movement wanted to make Christianity appealing to these free love hippie types. In order to appeal to a generation suspicious of authority, the movement stripped church of anything that looked or sounded traditional or institutional. Cathedrals were replaced with coffeehouse-style gatherings, and hymns were replaced with music that sounded like the folk and pop music popular at the time. This folk pop style was the sound of the movement for decades until eventually Joshua Tree by U2 came out in 1987 and changed everything. This album's influence on modern worship music cannot be overstated. Really, after this video, go listen to Where the Streets Have No Name and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. It sounds like every modern worship song to this day. In case you don't believe me, here's a video of the actual church I attended as a kid playing a song from this album during a Sunday morning service.
But I still haven't found what I'm looking for. But I still
There's nothing wrong with this album, by the way. I actually really like this album. It's in the CD player in my car right now. It's just kind of culturally interesting how influential it's been on modern Christianity. Anyways, back to the point. The Jesus People movement was actually very successful, and it brought tens of thousands of troubled young people into the faith, and that's a wonderful thing that it should always get credit for. However, in an attempt to make the church more palatable to a rebellious generation, it brought baggage from the counterculture into the church, namely a distrust of institutions and tradition. However well-intentioned it was, the movement brought with it a certain arrogance, the assumption that the church needed to be reinvented to be real. The concept of overhauling the church to look and sound like the popular culture was completely new and unprecedented. Historically, hymns and chants developed organically out of the worshiping life of Christian communities, and were shaped by their theological beliefs. For example, in Eastern Orthodoxy, chants are meant to reflect heaven touching earth. They're slow, weighty, and very reverent. Catholic chants emphasize order and harmony because they see beauty and order as qualities of the divine. Martin Luther wrote simpler, congregational hymns because of his conviction about the priesthood of all believers. He wanted everyone to be able to sing. John Calvin insisted on only using psalms because he was really concerned about human influence in worship. These musical styles were formed organically within church traditions by what those traditions believed worship was supposed to be, not by importing what was going on in the popular culture. Now, by appealing to tradition, I may be losing some of you, because in many Christian circles, tradition is still considered a dirty word. But a tradition is simply that which has been passed down. Many of the cornerstones of the Christian faith are results of traditions that we as members of the church take for granted. Tradition gives you something bigger than yourself to belong to. When you sing a hymn or chant that's been passed down for centuries, you're stepping into the stream of the church's history. You're joining voices with saints that came long before you. That gives the music a weight and sense of home. It's recognizably Christian, and it has its own sound and identity that sets it apart from the culture around it. When Christian music just imitates whatever style is trending in the popular culture, it loses its distinctiveness and the sense of belonging that younger Christians so clearly need. According to many surveys and anecdotal reports, Eastern Orthodoxy and Catholicism have seen a large increase in Gen Z attendees. young people flocking to more traditional expressions of Christianity shows us that there's a deep desire for tradition and reverence, two things that our modern culture is very often deprived of. While the generations before us wanted to reform the church to be less formal and structured, seeing tradition, reverence, and beautiful cathedrals as barriers between people and Christ, the younger generation has had a very different experience. We've been raised in a world of rampant consumerism, pop culture worship, and irreverence, and now we want worship spaces that are beautiful, traditional, and utterly distinct from the outside world. In this way, Protestantism is largely failing us. And unless we return to the depth, beauty, and tradition of our Protestant roots, we will continue to lose young believers to the apostolic churches that still offer it.
Justice like the great deep. You are to serve both people and animals.